Joining me now, former CKE Restaurant CEO, Heritage Foundation visiting fellow, Andy Puzder. Andy, great to see you. This is a fight over the union contract, and I think that the contract expired in March of last year, but their demands are so much. The excuses being given are, we will not be enforced to come to work because of the high inflation, because we will have to spend more money on gas, mass transit, clothing, and lunches, despite the lack of salary increases. Andy, why haven't they been writing that for the last year and a half plus?
You know, I really can't imagine why they haven't been writing that. Obviously, they don't understand the economy particularly well, and I don't think anybody who reads the New York Times, particularly if you read Paul Krugman, who's their big economic expert and hasn't been right about an economic event in, at least a decade, I think nobody's going to be surprised that the staff doesn't understand economics. They probably read the New York Times. Look, the other side of this that's really interesting is that the New York Times is a big supporter of this woke capitalism, stakeholder capitalism thing. One of the aspects of stakeholder capitalism is that we're not going to focus on shareholders anymore. One of the groups we're going to focus on is employees. So what did they expect was going to happen? Did they expect the employees were just going to lay back and do nothing when the company comes out and supports activism by employees? You're going to get activism by employees. It's kind of an absurd situation. If the Times supported rational economic policies, their employees wouldn't be watching their wages melt like an ice cube every month. And if they supported rational business policy, they wouldn't be out there promising their employees the sun. And this is the situation they find themselves in.
Andy, how dare you make me come into the office? I have not gotten, I have not gotten a major raise. They want an 8% raise and a 5.25% cost of living adjustment. So I'm not coming into the office unless they give more money. What makes me so angry is that I watch every single day all of the people out there who are hustling and working their tails off, delivering packages, whether they work for Amazon or UPS, and all the people who are going into work, working in hospitals at the height of the pandemic when there was rioting in the streets. And those with soft underbellies who work at the New York Times can't get to work.
You know, the New York Times didn't become a great paper because people were working from home and refusing to come into the office. It became a great paper because people worked their butts off. Now, I don't think it's been a great paper for a long time, but it's certainly not going to recover with employees like this. You know, I do hear from people, particularly in the restaurant industry that I know, that there was a change in the work ethic during the pandemic, particularly in states like New York, Illinois, and California, where the pandemic restrictions were so heavy and you expected so much from businesses just to try and keep the doors open. And look, this is what happens. I mean, these people have been spoiled by this. I think when you were working and when I was working, in these kinds of jobs back in the day, you never would have argued about going into the office or having to work on weekends, or maybe you had to work a Friday night, or maybe you had to work 40 hours a week. Rational people would not complain about those things, but I don't think we're dealing with rational people at this point. We're dealing with people that were spoiled by massive government lockdowns and massive government largesse during the pandemic, and now they just want that to continue.
I had to, when I was little, run cartons of cigarettes through a tax stamp machine at my parents' warehouse. And I can still hear the sound of it now, and I'm pretty sure my dad would have made me sleep in the yard if I had not showed up to work on time. And I was little. But again, it gets to, a lot of people are having to close their businesses or cut hours because they can't get people to come in. And before we go, Andy, I wonder what changes in terms of if we can reverse this idea about work, because it's like it's very Marxist in the attitude.
Well, it may take an elimination of the Biden administration and their pursuit of government largesse. Maybe if we can elect Republicans into the House or Senate, we can slow this down. But the fact of the matter is that without more government money, the money that people have is running out. Mm-hmm. The programs have basically expired. Savings rates are down. They were up to 33% plus in April, May of 2020. They're now down around 5%. And consumer debts increased by about $2 trillion. So people, they spent their savings, they've maxed out their credit cards. They're going to have to go back to work unless they get more government checks. So if we can keep the Biden administration under control for the last 2 years, maybe we can bring this under control. If not, it's going to take a long time and it'll be much harder to eradicate.
Andy Puzder, great to see you. Thank you so
Same here,
much.
Dagan. Thanks.